Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be taking a look at the next issue in the Shadowhawk saga with Shadowhawk number 2. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in October of 1992, we can see here on the front cover that this issue features a special guest appearance by none other than Todd McFarlane's Spawn. If you'd like to know more about Spawn, please check out my Spawn playlist. And we can also see here that, strangely enough, Jim Valentino on the cover of this book, while not using a chromium per se, did use some sort of a metallic type of ink or paint for the armor that Shadowhawk is wearing. I don't know how well this is actually showing up on camera, but it is not the exact same type of coloration method that is used on the rest of the image. Created, written, and illustrated by Jim Valentino. Letters, Kurt Hathaway. Colors, Eric Vincent. Editor, Eric Stevenson. Assistant, Matthew Elliott. New Yorkania, Leslie and Adam. Special thanks to Dan Frega for the name Arson, and to Hank Canals. I've seen Hank's name. I really should learn how to say his last name. Here on the very first page, we can see that we are in Morningside Park in New York City, as New York being the base of operations for many of the early characters of Image. A small group of college students coming from Columbia University cutting through the park, not aware of how dangerous this park is, as they are quickly surrounded by a group of thugs brandishing guns and baseball bats and knives and all sorts of other weapons. And these four students, unfortunately, are in the absolute worst place at the absolute worst time, and things are not looking good for them. We see here on the next page, Shadowhawk is on patrol running across the rooftops of some buildings here in the city. As we are transported back to the park, we see here that the man with the beard, whose last name is Craigson, is very much terrified for his life. He says, "Take my wallet, take the girl, just don't hurt me." Wow, what a real piece of garbage this dude is. Unfortunately, the people that are surrounding him are even bigger pieces of garbage, as the man with the gun wastes no time in just shooting Craigson straight through the forehead, killing him instantly, as the rest of the gang don't seem too worried about the fact that there's just been a gunshot that's gone off. I don't think that they're concerned about police presence in the area. And the other students that were with Craigson are all horrified that he's suddenly been killed in front of them. They've never witnessed violence like this before. However, while the police may have not been in the area to respond to the gunshot, Shadowhawk is, as we see him leap off the top of one of the buildings he's on and try to get to them in time. Unfortunately for the four college students, he is too late, as we see him jump in after the four of them have all been killed. Shadowhawk wastes no time in quickly attacking all of the thugs, as we see him kick one in the face while he punches the other. Taking out his shuriken, he elbows another one in the throat, throwing his shuriken out and apparently slicing the throat of this man. So Shadowhawk, not afraid to potentially kill people, as he backhands another one in the face. And we get a close-up of his face here in the crack word, as we are led to believe that he's probably just broken somebody's bones and is really just opening up on this group of murderous thugs. Oddly enough, for Shadowhawk to be, I guess, somewhat of a combination between Batman and the Punisher, it was kind of insinuated in the first issue that while he is definitely more prone to a higher level of violence than Batman would be, that he wasn't necessarily willing to just kill people like the Punisher. However, I have a hard time believing that this guy is going to survive this injury. I'm just saying, getting your throat slit, generally not survivable. On the next page, we are teleported to another part of the city where there is a fancy party going on with a lot of wealthy elites from throughout the city, as we see a conversation happening between one Thurston Burns, who will look familiar to you if you've been reading Spawn or have been watching any of my Spawn videos. He is one of the reporters that is often talking about Spawn. I don't know if he's ever actually named within the pages of Spawn. This might be a little interesting piece of trivia that his name is Thurston Burns. I don't know if this is the only time he's ever named throughout the entirety of Image Comics or not, but there you go. If you ever wondered who he was, that's who it is. And he's talking to one Miss Antonetti, who we saw in the first issue of Shadowhawk. And they are at a party given by one Miss Bold, who we also met in the first issue of Shadowhawk, who is the employer of none other than Arson, the man who's been burning down buildings all over the boroughs of New York City. She's interrupted as she sees someone that she knows. That man, of course, is none other than Lieutenant Jax, who is hot on the trail of trying to figure out who Shadowhawk is and what his motivations are. They make their way through the crowd, catching up as the two of them are old friends. Miss Antonetti asks Thurston how they know each other, and he explains that they went to school together, as Lieutenant Jax is actually quite wealthy and comes from a very rich family, and she's actually quite surprised to hear this. Miss Antonetti then asks Thurston what exactly Lieutenant Jax is doing on the police force if he comes from such large quantities of wealth, and Thurston explains that it's because he has a strong civic duty and also because he witnessed his parents' murder at a very young age. Out on the terrace, we see Miss Bold speaking to Lieutenant Jax, asking him if he's back on the sauce. He says not this week, and that as much as she would prefer that he was here to see her, he's actually here because he heard the mayor was going to be here. Unfortunately for Lieutenant Jax, Miss Bold informs him that it's only the deputy mayor who has shown up, as he walks out onto the terrace behind them and interrupts their conversation. Lieutenant Jax has never met the deputy mayor before Miss Bold introduces them, and the deputy mayor then says that his work precedes him, that he knows exactly who Lieutenant Jax is, and that he and the mayor both want Lieutenant Jax to stop following the vigilantes. And this surprises Lieutenant Jax quite a bit, as he's somewhat dumbfounded by the fact that the mayor's office is concerned about him following these vigilantes when they have one man who's going out and just snapping people's backs in half, that being Shadowhawk, another man who seems to be burning down the city, and a crime wave that just seems out of control. We're then teleported to another part of the city where we see Arson engulfed in flames, which is, I understand that he's supposed to be wearing fireproof armor, but it still seems odd that he would just be like, yeah, I'm going to stand directly in the middle of all this fire. And he has been found by two firemen who have responded to the call of the building that's ablaze. They decide that they're going to try and stop him. And I don't know why they wouldn't have called for police backup. I mean, I understand they have axes and they want to do the right thing, but this guy's wearing crazy armor and has double flamethrowers, and these dudes aren't even wearing oxygen masks at all. Jim apparently didn't know a whole lot about how the fire department worked. At any rate, Arson is rather amused by the fact that they're going to try and do anything against him, and decides that he is going to make short work of these two. And then we see here on the next page that Arson quickly just opens up and torches the two firefighters and seems to be quite happy with his work. We're then teleported to another part of the city where we're introduced to two new characters who are Carl and Christina. We're not really sure exactly what they're up to, as we see they do have some guns and weaponry. It's stated here that Christina has been kicked off the police force for excessive violence and using, I guess, just completely inappropriate tactics when apprehending criminals, beating them up, breaking their bones, just going way over the top. She's telling Carl to hurry up and gather up all his gear so that they can get out of the abandoned building that they're in, as she believes that it's probably next on the short list of buildings that are going to be torched by the pyromaniac that is wandering the streets. And then decides to try and call in some favors from the police force, as she does happen to know Lieutenant Jax and is trying to get in touch with him. This is all we see of these two characters in this book, and it's not really evident exactly what the two of them are trying to do, but apparently they want to continue to try and fight crime. That's at least the insinuation that we get here from the book. And then we also see that Thurston Burns is once again on TV talking about how wonderful he thinks the vigilantes of New York are, but also stating that he believes that the people whose buildings are ablaze are doing it themselves, and that they're just so far gone that they're willing to just destroy their own houses, and that they're not worth saving. On the next page, we see that Miss Antonetti is not too happy about the things that Burns is saying. She challenges him, saying that perhaps the reason that their buildings are going up in flames is because they do not consider themselves to be part of the communities that they live in, that they're so disenfranchised that they don't believe that those are their homes, but instead they're prisons. Kind of just arguing about overall socioeconomic issues. Mr. Burns, of course, being somewhat of a firebrand and wanting to always kind of take the hot take road. And Antonetti, of course, not really feeling it and pushing back against it. And then we are teleported to another part of the city where we see that Shadowhawk has come to investigate the fires and figure out if he can catch whoever's doing this. But he seems to believe that there's a presence nearby, and he is then surprised when none other than Spawn appears behind him. And this is where Spawn's appearance makes almost no sense in this book. I'll be the first to admit that. I mean, it's cool to see the little, image share and universe crossover type of thing, but Spawn just shows up and basically asks Shadowhawk point blank, hey, are you the one who's, setting these buildings on fire? Because, if you're not, we're cool, but if you are, we're going to fight. It's just such a random way for Spawn to show up, especially at this point. Spawn number 4 would have been out in September of this same year, so this really doesn't mesh with the personality that Todd's been giving Spawn up until this point, and it feels as though Spawn would have just jumped in to try and do something about this rather than confront, Shadowhawk on the rooftop and just be like, hey, are you the guy that's doing this? Because I'll take your word for it either way. On the next page, we see that Shadowhawk tells Spawn he is not the arsonist, and Spawn tells him to end this tonight, to which Shadowhawk responds he intends to, and then Spawn just leaves. Just jumps off the roof, doesn't offer any help. Strangely enough, it just seems so odd that Spawn would encounter some other, crime fighter with a weird costume and mask and just assume that he's more than capable of handling this pyromaniac all by himself. None of this makes sense in the context of Spawn's character whatsoever. I just feel like this was such a wasted opportunity for a crossover in which, Spawn comes to the aid of Shadowhawk in some way. I understand that maybe that wouldn't have fit into the story, but if that's the case, then there was no real reason to have Spawn make an appearance in this book in the first place. We're then teleported to the police station where we see Lieutenant Jax barge in through the door of his office, which was already opened, because he's kind of wondering who's inside. And it's none other than the police chief, who is going through his files. Jax states that he better have a good reason for doing so, as he has not lowered his weapon yet. He's still, ready to go if something goes south. And then the police chief quickly says that he's going through Jax's files because he believes he has concrete evidence to prove that Jax is in fact Shadowhawk. However, it is impossible for Jax to be Shadowhawk, as at the exact same time that that conversation is happening, we see Shadowhawk in another part of the city, Harlem specifically, as he jumps from one building to the next, doing some really cool parkour across the rooftops, getting closer to the blades of the buildings and trying to see if he can figure out if he needs to go inside, but then he sees Arson exiting the building. He then wastes no time in leaping from the rooftop and punching Arson square in the face. Unfortunately for Shadowhawk, the suit that Arson is wearing is not just fireproof, it's also a relatively strong armor, as he is unfazed by the blow and quickly returns with a shot of his own, knocking Shadowhawk backwards. He rolls through it and lands in front of the fire. He is dazed, however. This should slow him down, but he's trained well enough that he decides to continue pressing the attack as we see him leap forward, punching Arson once again, trying to knock him off balance, but he can't, as Arson responds in kind, smashing Shadowhawk across the back. Shadowhawk then returns with a back elbow and then punches him in the face, smashing the visor to his armor. Again, this is not enough to take Arson out of the fight, as Arson returns with a huge punch of his own, knocking Shadowhawk back into the flame, and then he continues to shoot fire at Shadowhawk, believing that this is all it's going to take to end Shadowhawk and this fight. We see here on the next page, Arson believes that the fight is over and that he has dispensed with Shadowhawk as he is engulfed in flames. However, Shadowhawk's armor provides enough protection to keep him from burning alive as he rolls out of the fire. And as Arson is turning to walk away, he quickly throws a shuriken at him. Unfortunately, Shadowhawk did not realize that Arson had a pack of combustible gas on his back. The shuriken hits the pack and causes a massive explosion. Most people would have gone with boom in this instance, but not Jim Valentino. Instead, we get kablamo. We then see Miss Antonetti doing her nightly news report as she speaks about the explosion and the death or presumed death of all parties involved. The unnamed arsonist, whose name is Arson, funnily enough, and also the hero/vigilante known as Shadowhawk. But then she goes on to state that they're not sure if this was a good or bad thing that he was going around doing the things he was doing, putting so many people in the hospital. Despite the fact that they were criminals, he did deny them their due process. And she's wondering if, all of these criminals who have filled up all of the hospital beds in New York City were taken out justly, or if he should have worked more closely with the law. And we see a hand with a remote turning off the TV and someone saying, "Good question." We see here on the next page, we are now in a hospital room as a woman is looking distraught as her husband and or boyfriend, we're not sure, is lying in bed and is paralyzed because of Shadowhawk's actions taken against him. She's wondering now what will happen to her and this man's son, and how she will ever pay for this, and what's ever going to happen to him. She's very distraught, very upset at what's been done to the man that she loves, and says that if she ever came across Shadowhawk, she would kill him. We're then teleported to another part of the city, an alleyway, where we see Hojo, who we met in the first issue of Shadowhawk. If you'd like to know more about that, please check out my video on Shadowhawk #1. And he's looking for Johnstone, who we also met in Shadowhawk #1. Hojo, of course, being a drug addict, is hurting very bad. He believes he got his hands on some bad stuff and it's really messing him up. He's looking for help from Johnstone, who he can't find. But then we see a shot from the sewers looking up through a grate as something down in the sewers is speaking of the light and remembering that food lives in the light, and it's real food, not these tiny little morsels that it's been sustaining itself on for however long it's been down in the sewers. And then we see Hojo wandering out of the alley, trying to find Johnstone still, as this creature makes its way up through the grate in the ground. And that monster was none other than the liquefier, which I think I speak for most of us when I say, what the hell? This doesn't make any sense in the context of the story. You know, Shadowhawk doesn't have any superpowers to speak of. And, you know, at least when he was dealing with Arson was just a guy who was using high-tech gear to do his dirty work. He wasn't dealing with any kind of superpowered being or monsters. This is crazy that this weird acid alien freak monster thing is just living in the sewers of New York. And none of the other heroes that are in New York have come across it. We've heard no mention of this thing anywhere else in this book. Just suddenly, here's this thing. It lives in the sewers. It's been down there for God knows how long, just eating rats and sustaining itself on whatever food it could find. And now it's coming up to the streets so that it can apparently kill human beings and feast upon them for sustenance. Sure, Jim. Sure. That's where we're going with this, apparently. The next 2 pages are the Out of the Shadows letter column, where fans have written in almost all of these letters are basically just people saying that they like Shadowhawk and they enjoy Jim Valentino's work. But there is one that I found to be interesting, where one of the writers seemed to insinuate that Shadowhawk should basically be functioning the same as the Punisher, where he's just killing people who have done wrong and taking them out of the equation instead of crippling them and making them a burden on society for the rest of their lives. Which, one, it's pretty obvious that the person who wrote the letter was somewhat callous about the whole thing. But I actually like that Jim did this, because you can see that Shadowhawk is measured in what he's doing. He's not trying to just, callously kill anyone who is a violent criminal. He wants them to suffer. Like, he's actually, it's actually a bit more sadistic than what Frank Castle does, as Shadowhawk is trying to create a scenario where these people have to live out the rest of their lives in a crippled state and have to live with the constant reminder that this was a consequence of the actions that they took. He doesn't want them to get off easy and, just kill them. And I also like that Jim took the time to show that when Shadowhawk is doing this to people, it's affecting people who were not necessarily doing wrong. We saw that the one thug's girlfriend or wife is really in a bad spot now that this has been done to him, and also that man's son. Now, was that guy, potentially a murderer or some other type of violent criminal? Yeah, most likely if Shadowhawk did that to him, he wasn't really going around doing that kind of stuff to, cat burglars and whatnot. But does that mean that that guy deserved to have that kind of punishment inflicted upon him? It's hard to say, and I like the fact that Jim is forcing the reader to have to ask those questions as they read this book. Here on the next page, we see an advertisement in mail-away form to get Shadowhawk merchandise, where you could get t-shirts and hats and buttons and trading cards. And oh my gosh, I wish I could have gotten any of this stuff. I'm just 30 years too late. And the worst part is, this is so old, there's not even a website. This is literally just, here's a mail-away form, and these aren't even real pictures of the merchandise. These are just artist renditions of them. You don't even truly know what it is you're getting, because You're just getting what Jim has decided it's probably going to look like. And then on the next page, we see another installment of Extra Image, which is the continuation of the story of Infinity. If you'd like to see Infinity's first appearance, check out my video on Brigade number 2, which is where she first appears. Eric Stevenson, writer, co-plot. Richard Ory, penciler. Inks, Richard Ory. Danny Meeke, Norm Rapmond. Colors, Paul Scott. Letterers, Kay Hathaway. This picks up exactly where we left off in the last Extra Image in Brigade number 2, as we see Infinity is cornered along with the weird android that was wearing a trench coat that we don't know anything about. Is it from the future? Is it from another planet? We're not sure. She is powering up as she can tell there is a large squad of guards coming their direction, as we see the lead guard is talking to the man in charge, telling him that they're trying to gain access to the room that Infinity and this android are held up in. We see that they're all clustered up in a hallway trying to break through the door. Infinity decides to waste no time in waiting for them to get into the room, as she unleashes a blast of energy at the door as we see a large explosion. This, of course, takes out the squadron. The leader quickly radios back to his commander, who says to get out of there, that he's going to send in the heavy mechs. We see Infinity and the android huddled together as there is a large stomp of a robotic foot, and we see a, I guess, garage door type of wall opening up as this giant mech guy comes through, guns ablazing, just opening fire. Before they can react, the android takes a hit directly to the chest. Infinity is very upset by this, as that android is the only one who can provide her with any answers about her existence. Keep in mind, if you haven't seen my video on Brigade number 2 or read the first appearance of Infinity in Extra Image, she's only existed for like 5 minutes at this point. So she has no idea who she is, why she's here, or how she has all these powers, but somehow kind of knows how to use them. She jumps into action, attacking the android. The android tries to shoot at her, but she's powerful enough to just grab the android and throw it across the room, destroying it. It's kind of a convoluted battle sequence, but you get the gist. Here on the next page, we see that the mech suit has now been dispensed with by Infinity. She tries to make sure that the android is all right. However, the android is heavily damaged and its computer is no longer working properly, which means that it cannot teleport them out of this facility. 2 more mech suits show up and start to open fire. Infinity creates a force field, which apparently is a power that she has, and tries to figure out what the next move is, as she decides to grab the android and blast a hole directly through the roof of the facility and make her escape. We then see that some of the soldiers have now accompanied the mech suits as they report that Infinity and the android have left. And we also see this hand breaking out of one of the tubes within the facility. I'm guessing this is some sort of foreshadowing as to who Infinity's next villain may be. And we're going to have to find out, because this is only the beginning, as it states down here in the corner. On the next page, which is the reverse inside cover, we see an advertisement for Shadowhawk number 3, which will in fact have a glow-in-the-dark cover. That'll be cool to look at. I'm actually not sure if Infinity ever got any miniseries or monthly issues that I can recall seeing. I'll have to do a little research, because I know I've never come across any of them before. And that was Shadowhawk number 2. All in all, I feel like this issue kind of leaves a lot to be desired. There are some interesting story points that happen. Like I said, I do really like the whole idea of Jim Valentino trying to put in perspective that while Shadowhawk is trying to fight crime, he is leaving a real path of destruction in his wake. and making us ask the question, is it okay for him to hurt others to prevent them from hurting even more people? And it's a real, it's a real conundrum. It's a real question of morality. And I think that's a good style of writing. But I don't believe that this book actually executes on it very well. Like I said, Spawn's appearance in this book makes really no sense at all in the context of the story, both Spawn and Shadowhawk's story. The Infinity mini comic at the end, it doesn't seem to do a really great job of progressing Infinity's story, if her story progresses any further at all. It's not a bad book, and for whatever things that are going on in it that make sense, there are other things that don't. Again, the liquefier, what the hell is that even about? But these are just my opinions. Your opinions may be completely different. You might have thought that this was one of the best books you ever read, and if so, that's okay. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.